So that's the first opera we've heard so far that is in English, and it kind of makes me realize that when we're listening to these operas in these different languages, again, we're not getting the full story unless we understand those languages. And I remember when I was living in New York, occasionally rarely Peter would call me and say, "Hey, I've got a ticket," and I would always say, "Okay, I better take advantage of this ticket because it's the price tag on it's hefty," and so I would rush down to the city from Westchester, I lived in, and I remember my first time in the Met, and this may sound dumb, but there on the back of the seats was a translator.
That's great.
And it did allow, you're just like when you're watching a foreign film, your attention gets a little bit split, but you could glance at that and get a sense and then of what the song was or whatever and kind of turn back to your focus. But it's a different experience when you're hearing your own language.
Well, how important would it be to know what they're singing about, especially in a full opera where the drama is a really important element of it? You're not just sitting back listening to songs or whatever.
Because it is a marriage of drama and music, and if you don't understand the words, you're missing, in my opinion, half the contribution. But opera was only in the past century, since World War II, was there a sense of performing operas in their original languages for whichever audience heard it. Because up until then, when Italian opera was done, Italian was a little different because that was its own thing. But let's say a French opera being done in Palermo or Rome or Florence was always translated into Italian.
The singers are translating it?
The libretto would be, story would be translated into the language, and they would sing in the native language for the audience.
No way. But how's that even possible? Composed with syllables. Oh my gosh. I had no idea.
Yeah, you have to reset the words to try to fit the music. And sometimes they would make little alterations in the notes and the melody to fit the words.
You have to. Yeah, of course. Yeah, because writing for voice is so phonetic.
But the sense of performing opera in its original language for a native audience only came about really since World War II. Up until then, it was understood that, of course, the audience would have to be hearing the work in its language, in the audience's language. So everything was translated.
Right. Italian is the universal language of music. Like most everybody reads Italian terms.
Right.
And like Mozart's operas were in Italian. Beethoven, right? This is all in Italian.
But even in Germany, there was a tradition of translating all Italian operas into German and performing them in German for the German audiences. When I first moved to Vienna, where I studied opera after I finished college, I'll never forget my surprise. I passed the Wiener Staatsoper, the Vienna State Opera, and I saw the poster that said Der Liebestrank, and it was by Donizetti. And I said, Der Liebestrank? I don't know that title. What is that? And it turns out that even though they were performing it in Italian, it's L'Elisir d'Amore, or the Elixir of Love by Donizetti. And even though in that day, in the 1980s, they were performing it in its original tongue, the title was still in German because it's a holdover from the period when they performed it only in German. It was amazing.
Yeah, back in the days of the dubbed movies where they didn't even do the subtitles. They just would dub in bad translations of the title.
Yeah, I prefer subtitles all the way.
So, when the tradition started to perform operas in their native tongue, then the art form began to be criticized for being elitist because only, I suppose, the most educated people could understand. Imagine it in New York, an opera in Italian or German or Czech or French. But then in the 1980s, it came about that somebody had the bright idea to project an English translation of the text above the stage and call them surtitles. And that whole tradition began, and now it's everywhere in the world. And if they're not above the stage, as Ethan said at the Met, they're little digital screens that are installed on every theater seat.
Well, that's great.
So that everyone has the option of reading the translation as they go along.
Yeah, I mean, looking down at a libretto in the dark wouldn't be easy, right?
Right.
Well, one last thing about the John Vickers piece. So in this Benjamin Britten piece, it seems like we're beginning to hear some modern orchestrations and compositional things that aren't the classic romantic Italian sounds from the orchestra either.
Absolutely. I mean, as music developed in the 20th century and became more atonal and more complicated, opera composers too followed that trend.
I think Britten's kind of doing a good job of marrying both of them, like some Bartók pieces can do. It's got one foot in the past, one foot in the future, orally. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you put on Varèse's vocal music, which I love, it's just bombastic. It must be difficult to sing because where's the tonal center? How do you find your notes? And I was listening to Schoenberg's vocal music, and that's challenging to sing.
Very. When you get to Berg and Schoenberg, those are the most atonal intentionally of all time.
Right. Yeah. And so the singers are being taken out of their comfort zone all the way because they're singing tonal music. They're hitting their pitches in the key that they're in. That's how they do it. You know, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And now you're taking that whole system out of play. I mean, if you don't have perfect pitch, I don't see how you could do it.
What year approximately would that piece be that we just heard?
You know, I think in the 1950s.
Oh, okay. So fairly recent, yeah. Okay. So now we move on to a mezzo-soprano, Marilyn Horne, another famous name in opera. I see in looking at her brief bio here that, she was on Johnny Carson. She played a role on The Odd Couple with Tony Randall and Jack Klugman. So here we've got an opera star who's considered, a big enough of a draw to be a featured performer on a sitcom. She won multiple Grammys and just had huge success. Performed for the Clinton inaugural and another kind of modern star.
Absolutely, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about her technique and what made her so unique.
She had this amazing low voice. You'll hear it when you hear the excerpt, and with incredible power. And some people called it a machine gun vibrato. You'll hear that too.
Yeah. Tremolo effect.
Yeah. But she, like so many American performers after World War II, she got this incredibly great training, and training that was so good that she could sing all over the world in many different languages, many different cultures. And there were a whole generation of Americans after World War II who accomplished that by virtue of, speaking of virtuosity, of their excellent training, not only in music, but in languages and acting and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, the theater arts.
And I saw a phrase used with her, coloratura. Explain what that was and why she was known for her ability to execute difficult coloratura passages.
So coloratura, it just indicates an incredible facility with the voice to sing many, many, many little notes all in a row, like ha. That's why I call it a machine gun vibrato. Right. You'll see when you hear her. But to sing not just 16th notes, but 32nd little phrases of 32nd and 64th notes that would be extremely difficult to play on an instrument and even more difficult to do vocally, but she does it.
So tell us, Peter, what we're going to be hearing from Marilyn Horne.
So she sings Stride la Vampa from Il Trovatore by Verdi, which translated means the flames are jumping. And the opera title is simply the Italian version of The Troubadour.
So here we are back to the great Italians and Marilyn Horne.